Well, good afternoon and evening, everybody. Welcome to the June Acting for Justice gathering. My name is Jack Jezreel. I serve on the staff of Just Faith Ministries, and I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Leela Oakley, and we're delighted you could join us this evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. So let's begin with a prayer. This prayer was written by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's a prayer that's included in our small group program entitled Faith and Racial Healing, which guides participants in telling the truth about the history of racism in the United States, that we might work toward true reconciliation with God and restoration of one another. So let us pause for silence as we invite God's Spirit to be with us tonight. So, dearest Jesus, come and sit with us today.
Show us the lies that are still embedded in the soul of America's consciousness.
Unmask the untruths that we have made our best friends, for they seek our destruction, and we are being destroyed, Lord.
Reveal the ways the lies have distorted and destroyed our relationships. They break your shalom daily.
Jesus, give us courage to embrace the truth about ourselves and you and our world.
Truth. We are all made in your image.
Truth. You are God, we are not.
You are God. Money is not.
You are God, jails, bombs, and bullets are not.
And Jesus, give us faith to believe. Redemption of people, relationships, communities, and whole nations is possible.
Give us faith enough to renounce the lies and tear down the walls that separate us with our hands, with our feet, and with our votes. Amen. And now it's my pleasure to reintroduce you to our presenter tonight. Before retirement in 2014, Bob Hunter was a diversity and justice specialist for the Indiana Division of InterVarsity. He was also on the national leadership team for Black Campus Ministries of InterVarsity. He has taught courses in racism, conflict management, and occasionally statistics at Trinity College, Binghamton University, and Earlham College, and is the former chair of the Richmond, Indiana Human Rights Commission. He is the co-author of Loving Justice, published by InterVarsity Press, and the co-editor of Yearning to Breathe Free, Liberation Theologies in the United States, published by Orbis Press. He's on the planning committee for the NAACP town halls on dealing with the current crises in the United States and is chair of the Richmond, Indiana Interfaith Commission. He is also on the board of the Belonging Committee, dedicated to making the local school system a place where all students know they belong. Bob is also the pianist at Bethel African Methodist Church, and he also plays keyboard for a local band. Bob has two grown children, Rachel and Daniel. Rachel, a musician herself, teaches Spanish at a Quaker school, and Daniel is an organizer and skilled trainer. You might remember that Daniel was our speaker for the February Acting for Justice event. Bob was married to Dr. Carol Hunter for 40 years until her death in 2015. Together, they had worked for various organizations and taught justice issues to scores of students. Bob is on the board of Just Faith Ministries, I'm happy to say, where he exercises his great sense of humor and generosity. Thanks, Bob, for being with us this evening.
Thank you. It's good to be with you. The We're in really difficult times right now, and if you're keeping track of the news, if you can do that and stay sane, that's great. I appreciate any of us who can continue to watch news and really understand and take it in. And that takes a lot of prayer, I think, sometimes. So I really appreciate the prayer that was read to us and given for us. And continue to pray for each other. I think that's a really important part of our ministry. Some of us will not be able to get out and protest like others or march but there are prayer ministries. There's a ministry of encouraging, particularly remember speakers. If you know speakers who are speaking this Saturday for the No Kings rallies around the country, pray for them. Remember to pray for them. That's really important. Locally here, we're hearing rumors of the skinheads planning to show up. We don't know what that means. And there is a meeting happening right now in Richmond about that. I'm obviously not there, so you can pray for them as they talk about what should be done about that. I've been concerned for some time about the lack of historical knowledge of Americans and how soon we forget. In fact, it's easy for us who have lived some of that history to forget it. We don't remember some of the history that we've gone through ourselves. Historically, today is a special day because it's Loving Day. In July 11th, 1958, Richard and Mildred Loving, they were a married couple. He was white, a white man, and she was a Black woman. They were married. And they were living in Virginia at the time. And the morning of July 11th in 1958, they were woken up by the police who arrested them for miscegenation, that they were an interracial couple, and they were placed in jail. And they spent that day in jail. They had a court case, I believe it was the next day, and they were told that they would have to spend a year in prison or they needed to get out of Virginia. So both of them had relatives in Virginia, particularly Mildred had quite a whole family in Virginia. But so they got out, they went to DC, which was as close as they could get, that was safe. And they were told that they could not come back to Virginia, that they would be arrested if they showed up in Virginia in any capacity in the next 25 years. So they were banned from Virginia for 25 years. After 5 years, Mildred thought that they could safely sneak into Virginia for a family reunion. And they tried to do that, but they got spotted. And they were arrested and put in jail again for the second time. The civil rights movement was heating up at that time. And so Mildred thought that she could, perhaps they should fight this thing this time. So she wrote to Robert Kennedy. I almost said Robert Kennedy Jr. She didn't write to him. He was too young and not as crazy as he is now. She wrote to Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General, and he suggested calling the ACLU. So they got two ACLU lawyers, and they fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. And they won the case. It was a unanimous decision by the United States Supreme Court in June 12th, this day, in 1967. The court, they found in their case, and that got rid of all the anti-miscegenation laws in the United States. There were 16 states where these laws were shut down. There were 16 states where it was illegal for them to be. That's a reminder, I think, of how young democracy is. Democracy is only, we could calculate it by a number of things, maybe the 65 civil rights laws or the 1971, which was decision allowing women to be humans legally. until 1971, women were not allowed to be humans legally. They had no standing legally in court documents. And that was a case brought to the Supreme Court by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So we forget how young democracy is. So I would say a good round number would be it's only 60 years old. Now this isn't where that racism has ended. Racism hasn't ended, but this is just where there's no racist laws on the books, where there's no sexist laws on the books. So I wanted to, it seems to me that it's important that we tell this history, and that when we approach some of the MAGA people, we might want to somehow get some of this history under in their minds. I don't think this is going to change their minds all of a sudden, but I taught students for quite a few years, and I had some interesting encounters with students. One year I had a young woman who came in and she said, "I signed up for your class, Professor Hunter, but I can't take it. I can't do it. I will not take your class." So I said, "Okay, well, let me sign your paper." I talked to her for a while. I tried to talk her out of it. And she left. Well, she came back the next day in tears and said, I think I should take this course." And I'm laughing but I wasn't laughing at the time. It was just, she was in such turmoil. And she said, I'm really afraid. So I said, "Well, okay, do you need me to sign something?" She said, "No, I didn't turn it in. I didn't put the slip in to drop the course." I said, "Okay." And we talked a little bit and talked about what the course was going to be. And she said, "So I'll be there." Then she came back the next day or 2 days later. I can't remember exactly the timing on that third time. But she came in and she said, I don't know. I don't know. She said, I went to the bookstore and I picked up the book Malcolm X, and I started reading it, and I can't read this, Bob. I can't read this, Professor. I cannot do this. And so she finally, I talked her out of it, and she took the course. And I think the history, she just really resonated with the history once she got to reading it. Well, to make a long story short, she is an anti-racist organizer now. And it's amazing what history can do if people really understand it. If they don't see boogeymen in all the details. It might help some people to just understand, because most people today would say, "Well, yeah, I'm not for I'm not for the sexism, and I'm not for the racism, and I don't mind people being married interracially. I don't have anything with that. But I hate that ACLU." I said, "Well, you've heard bad things about it. What have you heard about it? And what do you know about the ACLU? Do you know that these cases, many of these cases that these laws that you're glad for were brought by the ACLU? Why are you, and so there's just lots of things that people fear. And people have this belief that the 1950s were wonderful times. When they are thinking about some things, they're thinking about the family, they're thinking about their lives, they may be thinking about, and if these people are white, particularly white males, the 1950s weren't great for working white people, but they at least had some promise. But they were terrible for anybody who wasn't buying into a patriarchal system, if they were women. Somebody who really was a woman who was really pursuing her own career, not necessarily single, she might have been married, but if she was pursuing her own identity, There were things she could not do. Um, and so I think it's really important for people to hear not only the history as I'm telling it, but maybe some stories. And I was thinking of one of my own stories. One of my own stories was my dad used to take us blackberry picking, and that was a great thing for us. We loved to go pick blackberries with him, and we would pick the blackberries. My mom would make a crust of a pie, and then when we got back with the buckets of blackberries, and mine was about this high, the amount of blackberries I picked because I was little. But we would come back with the blackberries, pour them all into one, and she would wash them and do whatever she did, and work her magic on the spices and the sugar, and put the top crust on and make a pie. That was an exciting day. And one day my dad came to me and he said, I found a different place to pick blackberries. So we're going to go to this place. And so we would trot through the woods. We lived right on the edge of a wooded area. This was in Woodmere Village in the outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio. And we lived right on the edge of that. And so on this occasion, we went to the edge of this wood. Now, my dad had picked there, but my dad had very, very light skin. And at a distance, he could pass for white. And I think so he didn't have any trouble when he went there the first time, or he wouldn't have taken us. But when we got there, we started hearing, and I heard this, I never heard this sound before. What was bing, right by my ear. And then I heard some overhead, and my dad said, let's go. And he started running. And, when somebody says run, you run. So I ran, all my blackberries were falling out, and we made it home. It was clear that people had noticed that we were a Black family, that he was a Black man and he had a Black family, because my mother is considerably darker than he was. And so we were clearly Black children. And I asked, should we call the police? And we could not call the police. The police would not have defended us at that time in Cleveland, Ohio, against a white family shooting at us, particularly because we were in some area and we just it wasn't going to work in Woodmere Village. It might have worked in Cleveland, downtown Cleveland, but it wasn't going to work in the outskirts where we were. And I think that's one of the stories I tell in my classes, because it helps people to understand, if they can just get into my skin and understand what it feels like to live in a country where you are not protected. Not everywhere. You're protected some places, but you may or may not be protected by law. What does that mean? And what does it mean when someone is saying, make America great again, let's go back to the 50s? That's a terrifying thought. And people, when they understand that, or they understand the reaction of people in LA, why it's easy for people to say, do the natural thing, which is to protect their families, to throw rocks or not. And I'm a nonviolent person. I'm for training in nonviolent tactics and whatnot. But I also want to say that nonviolent tactics are against what people usually do in their normal lives when they are threatened. And so we have to pray for people and understand what's going on there and help train people. And that's what I've dedicated my life to train nonviolent tactics. But we also have to make and help people who don't understand what's going there understand that these are not criminal gangs or activities. The little bit that's going on there, the little bit of violence that's going on there, is a reaction to people who are very afraid when their mother or their father, who are hardworking people, get thrown in jail. may be thrown out of the country and may be sent to a torture prison. And so those are the kinds of things that I think we need to really take a look at. So my passion for democracy really comes from the fact that I was 20 years old before we really had democracy in the United States. And one of the things that really upsets me on King Day and any kind of day that's celebrating the civil rights movement is that there is a nostalgia about that as well. It is believed that King was a motivational speaker. I've been to many, many King Day services where you get the feeling that King was a motivational speaker trying to help us to understand how we should love each other. And he was that. He was motivational. He was a great speaker and he was a minister. So of course that was part of his message. But part of his message was that we need to make the country a democracy. And the I Have a Dream speech, which is often cited as the sort of motivational side of King, we should respect each other and treat each other. He begins that talk not about I have a dream, but I'm here to declare a promissory note that has gone insufficient funds. I'm coming to bring a check to the United States that has gone bankrupt, that has not been cashed. And that's the talk he starts out. The promise was of a democracy, and we don't have one as far as its citizens of color are concerned. That's where he begins that speech. He's talking about democracy there. He's talking about laws. We're not talking about people's attitudes yet. I mean, he certainly was encouraging people to not have mean attitudes about each other. But what was dangerous about him was that he was declaring that we need to become a democracy. And his talk, ironically, in the talk that's so quoted as a motivational talk, was not about that at all. He stuck that in at the end. It was the singer Mahalia Jackson that said, "Tell him about the dream, Doc, tell him about the dream." That's why he ad-libbed that part. That part was ad-libbed. His speech on that occasion at the March on Washington was about democracy, was about making laws, the promises of laws, making them firm and actually practicing in the United States laws. So sometimes it's really important. Sometimes when you're talking to one, I guess your uncle, your brother, that person in your congregation or in your civic group of some sort, when you're talking to them, you might want to say something like this. Our disagreement may be over values, but I'm guessing in part it's about history. Let's talk about history. And some of you are old enough to remember some of the things I'm talking about. Now, others of you, I see, Leila is not, she doesn't remember this. But some of us do, and some of us may just barely remember it, and some of us may not have been in positions to face it. I mean, the same thing comes up when we're talking about polio, right? I mean, I don't know. I knew people in my class who had polio. And so I have a before and after picture in my head, but many MAGA people either forgot, if they're old people, I don't know if they forgot or what they think, or they're young enough that they don't remember. They can't remember. They have no historical background on what happened with polio and why polio shots are important and why Robert F. Kennedy Jr., why he's so dangerous. He's going to get people killed. So sometimes I think we ought to say to people, let's talk a little bit about history. Let's talk about democracy. And by democracy, we mean that there are no racist laws and no sexist laws, no, and we can get into the other issues, but I usually start with those because if you take more contemporary issues, then it gets bogged down in other things, but things that they claim to actually believe, and begin there. The as we look at LA, I think one of the great historical issues becomes immigration. And I think most people in the United States sort of go through this kind of idea that the United States has always been a welcoming country. We have that notion that, and that's simply not true. The United States was founded as a country where only white men of property could be citizens. That was the founding documents. That was our founders. Now, some of them were forced into that, and some of them were downright racist, and some of them were elitists of all kinds. And many of their ideas were wonderful, but some of them were not. And, our current president, President Trump, wants to say we hate America. No, we just want to tell the truth. Some things were good, some things were bad, and we need to say what those are and what needed to be corrected. But after that first Naturalization Act, there were a series of immigration acts that were passed, and they were, you had the Chinese Exclusion Act. And basically that was to keep Chinese people from becoming citizens. So when the gold rush came and there were lots of Chinese going in for picking the gold, the law stated that their wives couldn't be here because they didn't want Chinese people to establish residence in the United States. So they kept their wives out, which allowed for the growth of prostitution in San Francisco and the West Coast, because they were keeping these people from having any kind of family life. And it just fed that, the sexual needs of people in a way that was not healthy, certainly for those times. After that, there was a quota system. And the quota system favored Northern Europe. If you're English, you could get more people in than if you were Southern European. If you were from Italy or Spain, the quotas were down. And then they went down accordingly. And by law, you had to declare whether you were black or white. There were no other categories, it was black or white. By law, you had to declare whether you were black or white. Well, if you were a Filipino, what are you going to declare? Well, it would be dumb to declare that you were black because all the laws were against black people. So you tried to petition to be let in as a white person. If you were Asian, you had to declare whether you were black or white. There are only two categories. You can't be Asian. You just got to be black or white because that was the law. And so by law, black people were the category that defined disenfranchisement. By law, white people was the category that allowed you to have freedom. And and these court cases are ridiculous because one year a Filipino might be accepted as a white person and the next year they're accepted as a black person. And the reasoning in many of these court cases was things like, well, everybody knows that. It's by, by the last court case or by public knowledge or by consensus of the community. There were all kinds of reasons given for why one group was pitted against the other. But it's very important to understand that this is, again, law. This is not people being prejudiced in their hearts. That was certainly going on, but this is by law. So I think any of these kinds of details that you can sit down with and help a person understand. And not one conversation, you're not going to do this in one conversation, but if you have a relationship with someone, I think it's worth going through some of this history and say, did you know? You know, maybe just throwing it out there one time. Did you know that this is true? As I look at these immigration things and the whole ICE deportation issues, I'm reminded also of some of the history of how we related to Mexico. There's a meme going around right now that says, "It sickens me to hear Spanish spoken on the streets of Los Angeles, San Diego, Palo Alto, San Francisco, Santa Ana, San Jose, Santa Barbara, San Bernardino." Do you get the point there? That all these cities are Spanish by name, and if it sickens you, you don't get the point. You know, if someone is sickened by Spanish being spoken in places that are named Spanish, but what that indicates is that the history of that part of the country is in great dispute. That was part of Mexico, and there are family histories on both sides of the Rio Grande. There's family histories, and people have those histories. So when people were running around in Los Angeles with Mexican flags, they were simply declaring the history. This place has been both places, and we're being thrown out of here. And these places are named with Spanish names. These places have long-standing Spanish history. These places have long Mexican history. These are the places that our forefathers were raised as they were. And maybe your MAGA friend just needs to know something about the Alamo. We know what the Alamo was, right? The Alamo was a fight. Texas wanted their freedom. Why did they want their freedom from Mexico? Because Mexico did not allow slavery. And the United States did. And Sam Houston and the boys down in Texas, they wanted to have slaves. And Mexico wouldn't let them. When you understand that, you understand some of the depths of this thing. And I would take it, if you're in spiritual congregations, if you're in places where there's some spiritual discernment, I would take it even further and say these places have spiritual roots. People have died over slavery, and we gained property in the United States because we had slaves. We allowed for slaves in these territories. And Mexico was not allowing for that. So knowing this history, I think, is really, really important. And then there's gender. I'm going to take one more thing, but we could take all kinds of things to talk about. We could talk about, in 1950, women were not classified as persons for legal documents. And in a court case, in a couple of court cases, but one particularly in 1971, the court shot down the illegal treatment of women. That case was kind of tricky because it had some precursors. One was a man who was bringing a case to defend his children and his place in the children's lives. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg decided to take that case because she thought that she could defend a man better than she could a woman, because the justices, the lower courts, were laughing. They were saying, well, would you want your wife? They would look at each other and say, would you want your wife to have legality, and would you allow her to take the law into be able to petition on the basis of the law for your property or for your bank account or any of these things? Would you want your wife to become involved in that? And they'd laugh at each other and say, of course not. Who would ever do that? And so it was an old boys club. It really was. The courts were old boys clubs. And it was just ridiculous for them to think that women could handle these things. They had just lived in a society, and the nature of their socialization and the socialization of their wives was such that those things would never have happened. So she took this case with the band and won that case. And then some of the principles were able to transfer over to women as well, to say gender should have no place in the legality of these things. So she first defended a man and his rights to children, and then was able to defend women and their rights to be real legal entities and have standing in legal court cases. So what does MAGA need to know? I want to sort of try to summarize some of the things that I think MAGA should know. I think that MAGA and all of us should know that many of these cases didn't happen until the 1960s. And that was about 60, 65 years ago, 58, 55 years ago in some cases. So we're talking about 55 to 65 years ago that democracy became real. When people are talking about woke or CRT or DEI, they are really talking about the period of time when democracy took shape in a legal way in this country and shot down all the impediments to voting, to having people, to the legalities, to have people free. Almost all the pushback that MAGA is doing is about things that happened in the 60s. Number two was almost all the pushback happened after 65. Number three, the anti-democratic instincts of the United States are clearly tied to control by white men. Now that's tough because we don't want to pick on white men. I don't want to pick on white men. This is not. I have lots of white men friends who understand this deeply. But it is easy for me to understand that if you assume some kinds of privileges, and those privileges have been with you all your life, and then you suddenly realize that those were not fair privileges, to give them up feels like you're going backwards. It feels like somebody's taken something that's yours and taking it away. And that hurts a lot. And so I think that we have to have understanding for men who are feeling that this is happening. And they're not going to let it happen unless they understand the history. They cannot. You're not going to accept a backing up of what feels like your rights if you don't understand the history. And so I look at the protests and the MAGA protests, and I really, somebody just needs to help them understand this. It's not going to happen by just a speech. It's going to take somebody sort of months and years even to work through with them what happened there. I can usually pull it off in class. I've had students who are, I have students who come from one student one year, her dad was in the KKK. And I really wanted to help her understand him, not hate him. My goal was not to help her hate him. That was not what I wanted at all. What I wanted her was to understand him and to have ways of talking with him so that at least she had a running chance of communicating what she was learning. Now, I don't know if that happened. you see a student for a while, and I know that for some students, not coming from a KKK family, but others, they were able to communicate some of these things to people in their lives. And I've gone back to, I love homecomings, because sometimes I meet these students and I find out what happened after they left. And last homecoming, I met a student who just she said, my life has been changed, and here's what's changed. And that's exciting. And I wasn't, I'm not bragging about teaching. I'm thinking I want to brag about the power of storytelling, historical storytelling. That's what I want us to understand, that some of these things in stories and helping people to understand, telling the story of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There's some videos out there about her court cases. Maybe sitting down with someone and watching that together and just discussing it, and they may be very angry at the time, but if they realize that it's a different world because of this woman, they're not thinking so much that she's some weirdo on the Supreme Court who died, and didn't leave fast enough. I wish she had. That would have helped a lot. But hadn't left the Supreme Court. But she's not some weirdo or some woke person that is scary, but that she was one who fought for some of the rights you have today. And understanding that. Number 4, CRT, DEI, and woke are terms being used to stand for all of the progress in the 60s. Those are just made up terms, made to be scary by people who worked in terms that were used, some of them during that time, some of them later, by people who were understanding what was needed in the 60s. To get rid of woke would be to take us back to the 50s. And we all would be hurt by that. We all would be hurt by that. Because if you believe the history of the United States is that we've always been a fair country and everything has gone well, and yeah, there are mean people, but by law we've been great, then you don't understand the country. The country has not been evil all the way through. It's had evil at its time, but it never fixed. It never really became that place where everybody was treated fairly by law. I'm not trying to beat people into becoming, anti-racist by law. I'm simply getting rid of the impediments in the laws themselves. And that happened in the 60s, and we can't go back there. And we are heading back there. I mean, it's very clear that the anti-DEI stuff is not anti-diversity. I mean, what's the opposite of diversity, equity, inclusion? It's the opposite of diversity is segregation. The opposite of equity is inequity. And the opposite of inclusion is exclusion. We don't want those. And that's what's happening. When the head of the army came in, this latest, I'm dropping his name now. Somebody help me here. The Pete Hegseth, when Pete Hegseth took over, he fired General Brown. General Brown had developed all of the strategy to get rid of ISIS. He was a pilot, had been a pilot for 30 years. He was a brilliant general, and they got rid of him. Hegseth got rid of him because he said he was a DEI hire. Now, Pete Hegseth has nothing near the qualities of General Brown. So what was he thinking? The only Hegseth could have been thinking was, because he's Black, he's got to be less qualified than me, which was totally absurd. Totally, totally absurd. That's racism. and it's coming back. The Me Too movement, another quote woke movement, was a movement to make sure that the laws of the 60s are really being enforced. That men cannot use their power to abuse and rape women. And when you get someone like Weinstein or others, Bill Cosby, you get people who have enormous amounts of power. And they can do in people, they can do in women, send them drugs, talk them into stuff because their careers would be destroyed if they don't do it. And that kind of power just needed to be broken. And that's, again, it's just weird that people have been talked into thinking that the criminal treatment of women is okay. So I really think that this is a strategy that we might use. I don't think it's a universal strategy for everybody, but I do think some people in our lives, some people of the MAGA, and maybe not even MAGA, conservatives, may need just a little reminder of the history, and we may need it ourselves. We may need to be reminded that we are living on the wonderful sacrifices made in the 60s by many, many people who fought to take this nation from some of these principles and to finally get those into law. Now, we know we need to go much farther. You know, once we get the laws, then we have to develop a nation and develop people and help them understand. But I don't think that we will get that far. No white person is going to accept this if they don't know at least some of this history. I'm talking to a largely, I'm assuming, educated audience here who at least knows some of these things. And so I'm not trying to really sell you on this. I'm trying to sell you on the idea that this may be some of the things that you can bone up on so you can talk to other people about. And in your own way. I mean, I don't think you give people lectures. I think sometimes you watch a movie with people. Maybe there's a strategic movie that's out and you want to watch it with someone, and it's worth taking one of your friends so that you can talk about it. That's what I did in my classes. A lot of my classes were movies. You can start with there's a movie and YouTube about the Lovings. And maybe sometime in the next week or so, someone might want to see that with you and just watch it with you and understand what that was about. The word ACLU will come up and maybe they have a negative feeling of that. And that will give them one point of positivity, you know, and you can develop that to others. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm really thinking about history. I've really been thinking about history, and I've been thinking about what is the role of history in this? Now, there are many other things we have to do. We do have to protest, and we have to do these things, and arguing with people sometimes that's no good at all, and sometimes it does help, and sometimes it just helps you. You know, you get rid of your frustration, as long as you don't break the relationship totally. And so it seems to me that that's one of the tools that we need to put in our toolbox. And it seems to me to be a necessary tool, because I don't think people will see us backing out of, will back out of their positions without some understanding of why things are necessary. And if they think the country has been a wonderful country up until, you know, after slavery, I mean, most people say, okay, slavery was bad, but after slavery, everything got okay. We had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, you know, and then the 17th Amendment, and, you know, 16th and 17th Amendments. And And those made everything okay. And so we're all fine. We need to understand that those things never got put into place fully and everywhere in the United States. And that the 60s were about that, and they were tumultuous. They were a time of turmoil, and they were problematic, but things had to happen. And what we're trying to do is keep that intact. And we have a president that's taken it apart. And so that's what I had to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bob. We are grateful to learn with you and from you tonight. Thanks for sharing with us about this important topic and reminding us about the importance of historical record and history as we engage in conversations with our neighbors, our loved ones, and those in our community. I see some of you, as Bob was sharing with us tonight, started to ask questions in the chat. I encourage you to go down to the chat and continue to put your questions down there. While you take a minute to think about what Bob has shared and the questions you might have, I want to take a minute to share with you all about some upcoming events we have here at Just Faith Ministries, so you can think about ways that you might learn with Just Faith through our programs and take action in your community. So I'm going to share my screen with you all just to let you know of a few things that are coming up in the next month or so. We all remain concerned and honestly heartbroken about the cruel deportation policies that are being enacted in our communities. And I invite you to learn more about the history of U.S. immigration policies, some that Bob referenced just in our presentation tonight, and how to engage in healthy and holy dialogue about immigration issues. If you're interested in that, we have a program titled Faith and Immigration Justice. And I'll put a link in the chat to that program if you want to learn more and consider bringing that to your community for a small group experience. We also have an information meeting coming up on the program Faith and Racial Healing. This is a great resource to learn about the history of racial injustice in our country. This is one of those ways that you can continue to learn and to grow, and then share what you learn and grow with those around you to better understand what we see happening today, the injustices we see happening today, and how we got here. This program is a part of a 3-program series titled the Racial Justice Series, and I invite you to consider offering one of these programs in the coming year. And you might start by joining us on June 3rd to learn a little bit more about faith and racial healing. I also invite you to come back and join us next month. We're still finalizing the exact day and the exact presenters, but we are going to be hosting an event that will feature likely a couple of folks from the Los Angeles area who will be sharing about the current crisis and how we can each respond to what we're seeing happening in our own communities. So keep an eye out. We'll give that information out about when that event is as soon as we have the date. So keep an eye out, look for our newsletter, and if we're able to, we'll include it in the follow-up email next week. And then finally, I just want to invite you to come and hang out with us on June 24th. I will be there. Jack will be there. It's a Zoom drop-in. So this is an event for anyone who just wants to come and talk to us about Just Faith Ministries, about our work, about our programs, share updates about what's going on in your community. We just love the opportunity to connect with each of you on a smaller group level. So if you want to join, come and hang out with us for an hour or just for a few minutes, if that's all you have. We'd be happy to connect. With that, Jack, I'll turn it back to you so we can take a few questions from our presenter tonight.
Great. Thanks, Leela. Bob, if you're open for a few questions,
Sure.
I'd like to talk a bit more. Bob, one of the, I'll say this, I'm going to share with you one of the things that came from one of our participants tonight. One of the almost predictable comments that we get at Just Faith Ministries from participants of almost about any program that we offer is the response, I had no idea. I simply had no idea that what was fact, in fact, was fact. And one of our attendees tonight's right, many people, including me, experienced pretty poor social studies through many years of schooling, and are ignorant of the history that you're describing. And there are too many folks, in my opinion, who do not really care to know the history, the stories, the realities, and the truth.
Yeah.
Seems to me it's harder and harder to know the truth and even where to learn it.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm just inviting you to kind of respond. If a person wants to educate themselves, and of course this would be just a wonderful time for me to plug Just Faith programs. But in addition to that,
Mhm.
you know, if you were counseling somebody who just said, no, open my eyes, tell me where to go to read, let me just throw that to you and see how you'd respond.
Yeah. Well, I'm on the board of Just Faith too.
Yeah.
And that's why, but I wasn't at one time. So, I didn't found it. So I'm a little less biased than Jack. But when someone told me about Just Faith, I said, okay, you get some programs, and then I started looking at the programs, and I was amazed. And so that would be on my list. That would be at the top of my list of take a Just Faith program, and take one that would help you with whatever question. Racial questions, I think you could do no better than to take one of the programs for a number of reasons. One, you could read some of this on your own, and if you're inclined to do that, if you're that kind of person, that would work very well and put together a bibliography. But if you need to bounce things off people, if you need things in a group of people, if you need stuff to help, then Just Faith has that because you're doing it in community. And now the old Just Faith, before I got here just about time for COVID. So being online is a little trickier, I think, but it still beats trying to learn this on your own, because you can have real discussions and questions. And I've taken some of the courses and I've led some of them, and it's a marvelous time to sort of deal with things and find out things, and they're fairly thorough, both in terms of some of the things and environmental things. I didn't deal with environmental things tonight, but I took one of the environmental courses, and that was helpful to see what we miss, and to be reminded of things we know but we forgot, like turning the water off while you're brushing your teeth rather than let it run. I mean, it's just such a little thing, it seems, but you get in the community and you learn. So, racial justice, that series is wonderful. And some of the other courses as well. I hope we can do more things in gender as it goes on. There's also, but I would start there, but I would say you could also take some other courses, or you could maybe sign up to audit a course at a local college. That's getting more dangerous as the Trump administration begins to tear up those courses. And so it may be that we will be left with the more informal things left with informalities like Just Faith. But I would start there. I mean, you're here now, so I mean, of us, and I would take one of the courses, or if you know some of the stuff and you want to pass it on to others, put together a group of people that will study it together, either locally or online, and get somebody who can lead it, or maybe you could co-lead it, so next time you can lead it. We just need this, and we're going to need this worse and worse.
Bob, it seems to me that the current administration's passion for, as you describe it, sort of tearing up things in academia, it just proves the point. And Melanie makes this point in the chat that the the Trump administration recognizes the importance of history and how important it is to disguise it or to hide it altogether.
Yeah. And that's in the playbook of almost every single dictator ever. If you listen to Ruth Ben-Ghiat, an expert on dictatorships and strongmen. She got a book called Strongmen, past, present, and future. In that book, she articulates the need for getting rid of history and also taking down academia. Those are the first two things strongmen do.
Angela writes, seems like folks have the construct of the zero-sum games. America has always had someone on the bottom rung. How do you hold conversations about that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that she obviously knows where to start there, which is we don't have to have a bottom rung, and it isn't a zero-sum game. But we also, I think, need some education about community and how communities work, and that how communities work better if they work together, if we're not trying to put someone on the bottom. And so some looking at how the importance for you of having other people in community with them, and diversity is wonderful. I mean, there's some stuff that people bring, and every once in a while, the Black community is known for its dance, but I like those Irish dancers because there's something about the leg movements without moving the rest of your body that there's just something there, that does something for you that funk does not, and I love me some gospel piano, but I love some classical music. And then I love when someone like Quincy Jones would take, a piece of classical work and make it funky. And you get both of those. You get the kind of chord movements, and in fact, one of the great white guys that did that died today. The Wilson of the Beach Boys. Some of his stuff that he would take and bring, some of the quartet groups would bring together with some of the rock music, and then he would get some stuff, and he had people looking at his stuff and saying, "This is amazing." Or Sly and the Family Stone, who died two days ago. He took some of the some stuff from white rock, that was developing at the time, and then wedded it with funk and some James Brown sounds and put together a whole different kind of music. And so musically, and I have a whole thing I do on music that talks about how diversity has worked in music, because it's easier to see in some ways and how it puts together. And if we understand that, then we understand that we're not losing anything. We're gaining something by diversity. That puts something together, that gives someone a new idea, and they can take both of those ideas and develop them into something yet even better or different and creative in other ways. And so I think we need to teach that, I think.
Well, this will make both of us happy. Susan writes, thank you so much for the program tonight. I'm planning to bring the Just Faith program on racism to my church in the fall. This session has been very helpful, and indeed it has, Bob. Let me just take a moment to thank you and invite everybody who's in attendance tonight. If you could give a silent clap for Bob and sharing his time and insights with us, we certainly appreciate it, Bob. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just reiterate that Leila will be sending an email to all of you later this week or by Monday with a video link to tonight's presentation. I think one possibility for those of you who want to engage in a conversation with a friend is simply to show the recording of this video. Bob's manner is so approachable. He doesn't, he's not out to hurt anybody, and I think his words can be heard without offense. So I just encourage you to use this video link. Again, thank you all for being with us tonight. We will close our time with prayer. This past week, one of my favorite teachers and mentors, Walter Brueggemann, passed away. In memory of what I think was his courageous body of work, we close our time together with a prayer from one of our anti-racism programs entitled Faith and Racial Healing, and this prayer was written by Walter Brueggemann. We chose this prayer because it speaks to the painful history that was named tonight of a country built on the backs of enslaved people and prison laborers and undocumented workers, all exploited in the name of wealth and so-called freedom. So may this prayer be an expression of our collective commitment to truth-telling about our history. Let us pray. Since our mothers and fathers cried out, since you heard their cries and noticed, since we left the brick production of Egypt, since you foiled the production of schedules of Pharaoh, we have known your name, we have sensed your passion, we have treasured your vision of justice.
And now we turn to you again, whose precious name we know. We turn to you because there are still impossible production schedules, still expletive systems, and still cries of pain at injustice, still cheap labor that yields misery.
We turn to you in impatience and exasperation, wondering, how long before you answer our pleading question, hear our petition, since you are not a labor boss and do not set wages?
We bid you, stir up those who can change things. Do your stirring in the jaded halls of government. Do your stirring in the cynical offices of the corporations. Do your stirring amid the voting public too anxious to care. Do your stirring in the church that thinks too much about purity and not enough about wages.
Move as you moved in ancient Egyptian days. Move the waters and the flocks and the herds toward new statutes and regulations, new equity and good health care, new dignity that cannot be given on the cheap. We have known now long since that you reject cheap grace, even as we know now that you reject cheap labor.
You, God of justice and dignity and equity, keep the promises you bodied in Jesus, that the poor may be the first-class members of society, that the needy may have good care and respect, that the poor earth may rejoice in well-being, that we may all come to Sabbath rest together, the owner and the worker, the leisure class and the labor class, all at peace and dignity and justice, not on the cheap, but good measure, pressed down, running over, forgiven. Amen.
Amen. And thank you all for being with us. We look forward to seeing you again next month. And thank you for joining us. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Good to be with you all this evening.